Welcome, everybody. I'm sorry I had to cancel last week's, but I understand you had a good session with Jainism. Give me just 1 minute. I'll just load the slides. I hope you're all getting involved with the activities during the Ambil Loli. Let's start with the Pratna. Namo Orientanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayariyanam, Namo Vajjayanam, Namo Loe Sappasahunam, Eso Panchanamukaro Sappapavapanasano, Mangalanancha Sapvesim Padmam Havai Mangalam, Namo Arihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayariyanam, Namo Vajjayanam, Namo Loe Sappasahunam, Eso Panchanamukaro Sappapavapanasano, Mangalanancha Sapvesim Padmam Havai Mangalam, Namo Arihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayariyanam, Namo Vajjayanam, Namo Loe Sabbasahunam, Eso Panchanamukaro Sappapavapanasano, Mangalanancha Sapvesim Padmam Havai Mangalam. Veera Sarusura Surendra Mahito Virambudha Sansrita Virena Bhiyata Swakarma Nichayo Viraya Nityam Nama Veera Tirthamidam Pravutamatulam Veerashagoram Tapo Veere Sri Dhruti Kirtikanti Nichaya Sri Veerabhadram Disa Kamuthe Dharanendra Cha Sochitam Karma Kurati Prabhustulya Manobrutti Parshvanatha Sri Estu Anguthe Amrutavase Laptitana Bandar Sri Guru Gautam Samuriye Manavanchita Fadadatar. As I mentioned last time, we have got a couple of well, at least one more lesson today on the topic of bandh, of karma, and then we will have maybe 1 or 2 classes on nirjara and probably 1 class on moksha, and then we'll have briefly completed our course on Nav Tatva. And as I mentioned last time, there is a lot more to learn on this particular topic, but we have covered it in brief. So please carry on your private studies. We will talk about the next topic when I have a conversation with Ajitbhai. But if you have any particular suggestions, then please feel free to send a message to Ajitbhai and to me. Thank you. Just going to share my slides now. I got some new slides on today's topic, so we'll move on straight to that. Except for the last slide from last week. This is relevant. The 4 types of bandh that we discussed, just as a reminder, is Prakriti bandh, Sthiti bandh, Ras bandh, and Pradesh bandh. and we'll be discussing uh, some aspects of this as well today. We mentioned some of the terms that we are going to talk about earlier. So, Bandh is what we just described. Uday, the fruition of karmas when it is activated to show its effect. Sata, the duration during which the karma remains inactive, bound to the soul before the time for its fruition has come. This is also called the abada kal of the karma. Udirna, the process by which karma is brought into fruition faster. The process is likened to the quick ripening of, say, mangoes. We'll discuss this a bit more later. Again, the four kinds of bandh: sprusht bandh, badh bandh, nigat bandh, and nikachit bandh. We'll be talking about these terms as well again. Today's topic is about Karan. Before we start onto this topic, let me just stop sharing from this slide for a minute. We have probably all heard these terms that karma je bandhya hoye te bhogavaj pade. Now, that statement is true for nikachit karma. A lot of karmas that are bound are not of that nature. They are not nikachit. Hence, those karmas can be modified, and the process of this modification is called Karan, and we will be discussing that today. The term Karan is also applied to the process by which the karmas are bound to the soul. So the term Karan can be a bit confusing, but basically anything or any activity or any process by which an event or a piece of work is accomplished is called Karan. જેના વડે ક્રિયાની સિદ્ધિ થાય તે કરણ. The example that's given here, say, is if somebody fires an arrow onto a tree to knock down a fruit from a branch, the process by which the fruit is removed from the branch of the tree, so the firing of the arrow at the correct point so that the stem of the fruit breaks and is torn and the fruit falls down. So this process or this kriya, this activity, therefore the ban, the arrow are called karan. Another example that's given here is that ek soni, meaning a jeweler, keeps on beating a piece of gold to flatten it. So with a hammer to make a thin sheet of the gold. that particular kriya is called karan. Thodane, so the kriya or the instrument, the hammer is called karan. The different activities with the power of yoga, meaning the power of the mind, speech, and the body, and adyavasai. Adyavasai is the state of the soul, the uh, purity of the soul, purity or otherwise of the soul. અધ્યવસાયના બળ વડે કર્મને લગતી જુદી જુદી ક્રિયાઓ સદાય એને કરણ કહેવાય. એટલે યોગ અને અધ્યવસાયના બળને કરણ કહેવાય. Now, the term Karan is ascribed to 8 different such processes, and we'll go through these processes. Some of those you've already heard about, but the ones that you have not, we will go through those in a bit more detail. Just a summary, Nikachit karma do not change, hence the time, when the time comes for the fruition, the karma will deliver what is meant to in full force. Anikachit karma, before it comes to fruition, Uday, anikachit karma is subject to change or can be subjected to change. Karma bound to the level of nigat, or really it should be nidhat, not nigat, nidhat, slightly less intense than nikachit. These karmas do not change, but the sthiti and ras of nidat karma can increase or decrease. The karma bound to the level of sprust, meaning loose, and bad, can be changed with effort by the soul. Through the effort of yoga and adhyavasai, the effort of yoga and adhyavasai is called karan. Through the effort of adhyavasai, can accomplish 8 different actions of karma, hence karan is of 8 different types. Bandhan karan, we've heard about it, the process by which karma joins the soul. Basically, it gets incorporated for it to travel with the soul and show its effect at the time that has been determined. Nidat karma, the process by which sprust and baddha karma become nidat, meaning if a karma which has been bound in a loose fashion as sprust band, or slightly more stronger than sprust, there is baddha band, then if this karma then later becomes stronger and is bound more tightly to the soul, meaning that it would take greater effort to change it, so that karma which is sprust and bad would become nidhat. And what changes in the karma is that the sthiti, the duration of that karma, and the ras of that karma can be reduced sorry, I made a mistake there, can be increased. So when a sprust and baddha karma when the sthiti and the ras of that karma can be increased, that is called nidatkaran. Nikachnakaran, the process by which a karma becomes nikachit, meaning it becomes much more tightly bound, so no change is possible within that karma in the future then, and that it becomes unchangeable. Udvartanakaran, the process by which the sthiti and ras of a karma increases. Apvartanakaran, the process by which the sthiti and ras of a karma is reduced. Sankramankaran, the process by which the type of karma changes within the same category of karma. And Udirnakaran, the process by which the karma becomes the process by which the karma comes to fruition earlier than destined. And Upsamanakaran, the process by which the karma stays dormant. So these are the processes that are carrying on in all the karmas that we have in stock. So it is not a static process. So the karmas which are not nikachit are undergoing different kinds of changes depending on the kinds of activity of the mind, the body, and the speech that we engage in, and the state of the soul, meaning yoga and adhyavasai. And these processes are constantly changing the type of karma that we would have acquired in the past, which are changeable or which are modifiable. So in short, the different processes are given different names. So the processes by which the karma increases in intensity. And a simple example of this is given like this, that if you have tied a knot loosely at first, and then you want to tighten that knot, then you pull at the two ends of the string and the knot then gets tightened. Similarly, if a karma has been bound loosely because one has just made a weak effort in binding that karma and without much thought, but then later on one gives it a lot more thought and then gets excited about what has been done or what has happened, and one gets very proud of that fact, and you start boasting about what you had done, then that particular karma becomes more strongly bound to the level of it becoming nidhat. If that process carries on further and that karma then becomes nikachit, that means there will be no way of changing it at all. And even with nidhat karma, the intensity of that karma, sthiti and ras can be changed, but there cannot be any other changes. There is the example given that we have talked about when we talked about Shrenik Maharaja and his boasting of the fact that he had killed a deer and her unborn baby with one arrow. So he says, I am such a great archer that I have killed two lives with one arrow. And he was quite proud of that fact. And at that moment, he bound the karma of his next life to go to Narak. And that was a Nikachit karma that can not be modified. Karmas which are Nidat cannot undergo Udirna or Sankraman, meaning the type of karma cannot change, and it cannot come to fruition earlier than it is destined to. So a karma coming into fruition earlier than it is destined to is called Udirna, and be that can happen as a result of the effort of the soul. So a karma which may be lying dormant can be brought into fruition earlier. So one has got rid of that karma in advance, basically in advance of when it was due to come to fruition. But a karma which has become nidhat, the sthiti, meaning the duration or the time it lays dormant or the time it takes to unwind when it comes to fruition, and the intensity of that karma can be modified by nidat karan, but that karma cannot be brought into fruition earlier than it is destined to. So that cannot actually, udirana karan cannot happen to that karma, and sankraman, meaning the type of karma cannot be changed. And the lesson to learn from this is that if one has done something wrong and bad, then the correct response is feeling sorry for it, asking for forgiveness, seeking forgiveness from the person that we've hurt, making amends for the hurt that we may have caused, and not gloating over a bad deed, because that then changes a karma which may have been bound loosely to something which then becomes much more tightly bound or absolutely tightly bound, like either nidat or nikachit. And if once you have acquired a karma, and we do this all the time, so if we are upset or angry about something that has happened, we find it very difficult to let go and keep on thinking about it. And even though we may control how we react verbally or physically, the thoughts of that are fueled by the anger or by a sense of having suffered a loss or the sense of having been a subject of somebody's ridicule or having the sense that somebody has hurt one, and one keeps on thinking about that process and keeps on fueling the anger, then that process will make the karma bound tighter to the level of nidat. And if the anger is worse, it can tighten it to the level of nikachit. કર્મ બાંધ્યા પછી અત્યંત ઉલ્લાસ આવે, રાજી રાજી થાય અને વારંવાર પુષ્ટિ કરે તો એ કર્મ નિકાચિત બની જાય છે. એના પર પછી કોઈ પણ કરણની અસર થાય નહીં. આ રીતે સ્પૃષ્ટ બદને નિદત્ત કર્મને નિકાચિત કરનારું જે કરણ છે તે નિકાચના કરણ છે. So all karmas that are bound loosely, spruced, bad or nidat karmas, they can be converted to nikachit karmas. And an example that is given here of a positive or of a good karma, of a punya karma, is the Tirthankar Nam karma that is made firm and becomes nikachit in a Tirthankar Paramatma's journey in the third life before they become a Tirthankar. So in that life, the Tirthankar Nam karma is then made very firm, and it is then guaranteed to give its fruits. So that person is then destined to become a Tirthankar in the future. And it generally happens in the third life before the life of that they would be born as a Tirthankar. The process by which the sthiti and the ras of a karma increases is called udvartanakaran, meaning the karma becomes more intense and it may last longer. The opposite of that is apvartanakaran, meaning the process by which કર્મની સ્થિતિ અને રસ ઘટી જાય એ અપવર્તના. So for spiritual progress, the process of apvartana is very important, because if we reduce the intensity of bad karmas that are lying dormant, Sandeep is asking, what is the difference between udvartana karan and nidat? And then you see, udvartana karan or nidat karan is particularly relevant to let me just go back to this. Karmas which become spruced and bad karma becomes stronger, nidat, તે કર્મને નિદત કરણ કહેવાય. You see, the way it is explained here, ગાંઠ ઢીલી બાંધી હોય અને પછી એ ખેંચવામાં આવે તો મજબૂત બને છે. એ જ રીતે પ્રથમ નીરસ ભાવે બંધાતા કર્મ ઢીલા બાંધ્યા હોય પણ પછી એને પ્રશંસા કરવામાં આવે, બડાઈ હાંકવામાં આવે તો એ કર્મ મજબૂત થાય અને નિરત અવસ્થાને પામે. આ રીતે સ્પૃષ્ટ કે બદ કર્મને મજબૂત કરનારું જે કરણ છે એ નિદત કરણ છે. જે કર્મ નિદત અવસ્થાને પામ્યું હોય તેની સ્થિતિ અને રસ અધ્યવસાયો દ્વારા ઘટાડી શકાય છે. So a karma which has become more intense from sprusht and bad to nidat, the sthiti and the rus of that karma can be reduced, but the type of karma and cannot be changed, and it cannot come to fruition earlier than when it is destined. And generally the કર્મની સ્થિતિ અને રસ વધી જાય તે ઉદ્વર્તનાકરણ કહેવાય. So Sandeep, I suppose nidat is particularly about making the karma more tightly bound, and udvartanakaran is more with respect to the sthiti and ras of that karma. And I understand your confusion, because to me as well, they both seem to be doing the same thing, but possibly not necessarily explained or detailed here, something that we would probably have to seek a more detailed answer from somebody more knowledgeable. The difference between nidat and udvartanakaran. But I suppose the nidat karan is particularly with reference to a karma changing from sprusht and bad to nidat level, and nikachna karan is about sprusht bad nidat level of karma changing to nikachit, and udvartana karan is more about any karma. So a sprusht karma's level changing from sprusht to bad is not covered under nidat karan, but it would be covered under udvartana karan, because the duration of that karma and the ras of that karma is increased. So it is possible that both those processes can go on simultaneously. So karma, the process of udvartana and the process of nidat karan can be going on simultaneously in different types of karma. And when the ras and the sthiti of the karma is reduced, that's called apvartana karan. Now, અશુભ કર્મફળ ભોગવવાના કાળનું પ્રમાણ તથા અનુભવની તીવ્રતા નિર્ણિત થયેલી હોવા છતાં પણ આત્માના ઉચ્ચ કોટીના અધ્યવસાયો રૂપકરણ દ્વારા તેમાં ન્યૂનતા કરી શકાય છે. So what that means is that if a karma was originally bound to, for example, to the level of harm that was subjected to another life, for example, and a karma was bound of an equivalent punishment in the future for the soul, then if, as a result of repentance and penance, that karma is modified, then the intensity of that experience that was originally decided upon at the time of binding that karma would be reduced. So, for example, if a karma was destined to give one an experience of, say, for example, having a leg amputated, but and losing a limb, but then it gets modified to a level where the limb doesn't get amputated, but it stays hurt for a duration which was probably lower. So it doesn't become a permanent disability, but becomes a temporary disability. So અનુભવની તીવ્રતા અને કાળનું પ્રમાણ. So the duration of for which that particular karma gives that particular experience can be reduced. So the person may suffer for something for a certain amount of time and not a very, very long time. And that time duration may be reduced from what it was bound for originally. આત્માના ઉચ્ચ કોટીના અધ્યવસાયો રૂપ કરણ દ્વારા તેમાં ન્યૂનતા કરી શકાય છે. So it can be reduced. And an example that is given here, say if somebody has been jailed for a crime for 12 years, but while he is in prison, there is, as you all probably know, there is a board in the prison which then rewards a prisoner for good behavior, and over a period of time, if that good behavior continues, then somebody's sentence of imprisonment may be reduced by a few years. So somebody who has been given the punishment of 12 years for the crime that they've committed, but during their imprisonment, if the behavior is significantly improved, better following the rules, and the person, as reviewed by the payroll board, demonstrates that there is repentance, that there is remorse, then the sentence can be reduced and the prisoner may be released earlier than he was originally destined to be. So that is the example given here. So with respect to karma, good thoughts, sadvichar, sadvartan, meaning good behavior, and a statement that is made here that it's important to understand that repentance and penance are very important instruments in reducing the duration of existing karmas and the intensity, the duration of experience of existing karmas when they come to fruition, and the intensity of that karma. Another example that is given here, when the soul reaches the state when the sthiti of monia karma is reduced by a bit more than 69 Kroda Kodi Sagaropam, at that point the soul becomes much less burdened by monia karma, and it can make the effort of the process called Granthi Bhed, which then can lead it to, when it does that particular process, then it achieves Samyaktva. And as I've explained before, Samyaktva is the greatest step in one's spiritual progress, because after that, the road to moksha is guaranteed. ગ્રંથિ ભેદ કરીને સમ્યક્ત્વ પામે છે, તેથી વધુ સ્થિતિ તોડે ત્યારે દેશ વીરતી પામે. So if the there is further reduction in the intensity of monia karma, then one climbs up in the gunsthan to a further level of desvirti gunsthan. And when one reduces the amount of monia karma further, then one goes a further step to sarvavirti gunsthan. And the spiritual progress of the soul continues upwards by the amount of karmas that are reduced, so particularly the monia karma. And one sort of corollary to this statement that is made here is that the duration of experience of that karma may be reduced, but the size of the karma does not change. What that means is that karma may be experienced in a shorter time than it was originally destined, but the amount of the karmic particles, that remains the same. So the experience would be shortened. That means the karma is rid much faster than it would normally be destined to be. So for example, when we talk about if somebody is born with an ayushya of say 100 years, but all of us in this day and age have the kind of ayushya karma which can be subject to change, and that change is called sop karma. So ayushya ne sop karma lagi sake, and as a result of say major accidents or any major disasters, or as a result of some form of severe uh, misconduct, then one's ayushya karma can be reduced significantly. And for example, at the age of 40, 50, somebody who may have been destined to live 100 years and gets a sudden severe illness or has an accident, then the remaining 50 years of that ayushya karma would be spent in the last few moments of the remaining life and be rid. So that particular change can happen. એટલે કર્મની સ્થિતિ તૂટવા છતાં કર્મના પ્રદેશોના સમૂહ તો એમના એમ જ રહે છે. તે દીર્ઘકાળની બદલે ટૂંકા કાળમાં ભોગવાઈ જાય છે. Now, સંક્રમણ કર્મ is next described. કર્મની પ્રકૃતિમાં પરિવર્તન થઈ જાય તેને સંક્રમણ કહેવાય. And સંક્રમણ can happen in સજાતીય પ્રકૃતિ. વિજાતીય પ્રકૃતિમાં સંક્રમણ cannot happen, meaning on the same type of karma. The main categories of karma are 8, as we know. But the subdivision of those 8 karmas are further subdivided into total of 158 different categories. For the same karma, within the same category, a karma can become a different sort of type. The example that is given here, if one has bound a karma that is destined to give one pain, so asata vedaniya karma. then that karma, as a result of good spiritual state of the soul, as a result of good action, good activity, yoga, can be changed from asata vedaniya to sata vedaniya, meaning that karma would then in the future actually give that person pleasure rather than pain. And similarly, a sata vedaniya karma. So if you've done a good deed and have acquired a karma that is destined to give us material pleasure or material wealth or a sense of well-being, then that sata vedaniya karma can be changed to asata vedaniya karma as a result of bad behavior or as a result of a bad intent internally. So that process is called sankramana, meaning change. કર્મનું ઉદય જે કાળ નિયત થયેલો હોય તે પહેલા તે કર્મ ઉદયમાં આવે તો તેને કર્મની ઉદીર્ણા થઈ કહેવાય. આ રીતે કર્મની ઉદીર્ણા કરનારું જે કરણ છે તે ઉદીર્ણા કરણ કહેવાય. So if a karma is destined to come to fruition, say 5 lifetimes from hence, but as a result of some effort, if it is brought to fruition in this particular life. So for example, Bhagwan Mahavir's sadhana of 12 and a half years and that intense sadhana of the effort to get rid of all the karmas that were lying dormant. To an extent, there would have been a lot of other karmas which would have probably had a greater duration, but they could have been brought into fruition earlier in that time when he had done a lot of the penance, when he had suffered with equanimity all the difficult situations that he was put through that we know about. કર્મદલિકો ઉદય પ્રાપ્ત નથી તે કર્મદલિકોને જે વિશિષ્ટ અધ્યવસાય રૂપ કરણ દ્વારા ઉદય અવલિકામાં નાખવા તે નાખનાર કરણનું નામ ઉદીર્ણાકરણ છે. So karma that is destined to come to fruition much later is brought into fruition uday avlikama. So it comes to the state of uday earlier than it is destined to be. Now the question that is asked is, how can a karma come to fruition earlier? Now a way to explain this, we've touched on this earlier, is that if we have a basket of unripe fruit or mangoes, for example, and if we left them as they were, then they may slowly become ripe after about a week, 10 days, 2 weeks. But if that fruit is kept in a warm place covered with straw or paper or something that retains the heat within it, and it's kept in a place which is not cold or doesn't go cold, then that fruit will ripen in a few days. Rather than if it was left out, then it may ripen for much longer. So for example, if a fruit is plucked earlier, and we know this about mangoes very well, but also when we buy fruit like say apples and bananas, and then if you want to eat them after a week, then we buy that kind of fruit and say, look, this is something that will ripen over the next 4 or 5 days, and they'll be ready to eat in about 4 or 5 days. But if you wanted to eat them earlier, say 2 or 3 days, then we would keep that fruit in a warm place, and that fruit would then ripen earlier. So similarly, the process by which a karma comes to fruition earlier or becomes ripe earlier than it was destined to be, That is called Udirana Karana. And a simple corollary here again is સામાન્ય નિયમ એવો છે કે જે પ્રકૃતિનો ઉદય ચાલતો હોય તે પ્રકૃતિની ઉદીર્ણા થઈ શકે. So for example, if at the moment we are experiencing a period of ill health, and during that time we are suffering a lot of pain, and if that discomfort and pain is suffered silently and with equanimity and with a very positive attitude and a sense of forgiveness and a sense of understanding that one has acquired this karma in the past, it is nobody's fault, that one has to experience what one has been destined to experience as a result of the karma that one has acquired in a previous life. Therefore, I will not blame anybody and I'll suffer this silently without getting upset. Then that process itself may bring to fruition some other karmas that may be still lying dormant and may be experienced in that period while that other particular karma is showing its effect. So what this statement says, સામાન્ય નિયમ એવો છે કે જે પ્રકૃતિનો ઉદય ચાલતો હોય, so અસાતા વેદનીય પ્રકૃતિનો ઉદય ચાલતો હોય in વેદનીય કર્મ, તે પ્રકૃતિની ઉદીર્ણા થઈ શકે. So a prakrutini udirna thai sake, meaning other karmas which are lying dormant, which are destined to give a bad experience in the future, may come to fruition earlier. The karma that has begun to show its effect, ઉદયમાં આવેલું કર્મ પૂર્ણકાળે ઉદયમાં આવ્યું છે કે ઉદીર્ણા થઈને ઉદયમાં આવ્યું છે તે તો જ્ઞાનીઓ જ કહી શકે. So only a તીર્થંકર પરમાત્મા or somebody with a special knowledge, કેવળ જ્ઞાની કે બીજા જ કોઈ મહાત્મા ભગવંતો જેની પાસે એવું જ્ઞાન હોય, only they would be able to tell us whether a karma has come to fruition at its destined time or has come to fruition earlier than it was destined to be. કર્મ ઉદીર્ણા થઈને ઉદયમાં આવ્યું હોય તો સમ્યક દ્રષ્ટિ આત્મા ભવિતવ્યતાનો પાડ માને. So if a karma has come to fruition earlier, then somebody who understands all this well, so samyak drashti atma, we would be joyful that I'm glad that I have in this particular state, when I have this understanding and I have the ability to suffer silently without reacting in a negative way, then it is good that other karmas have come to fruition at this stage, and let them come. I will suffer them silently. So, what it says, Samak drashti atma bhavittavyatano pad mane. So we are thankful that this karma has now come to fruition. I will be rid of it and not suffer it in the future. એ એમ જ સમજે કે દેવું ગમે તે સ્થિતિમાં ભરપાઈ કરવું પડશે. Meaning that if you got a debt, say for example, and we all do that, if there is spare cash in the bank and we got a mortgage that is originally taken out for 25 years, and we say, go to the bank and say, look, I want to reduce my debt and I've got 50,000 pounds remaining in my mortgage and I've got about 10,000 pounds spare cash now. Can I reduce the size of my mortgage by paying that 10,000 pounds and reduce the mortgage from 50 to 40? It is a similar process. And we would do that joyfully and we would feel less burdened. And because now I'm able to, I cannot actually pay that up when I'm I do not have the means and I do not have the freedom, or I have stopped working and I do not have any spare cash that I can spend now. So what's said that સારી હાલતમાં ભરપાઈ કરી દેવું ખોટું શું? So therefore હાલ વિતરાગ દેવ મળ્યા છે, નિર્ગ્રંથ ગુરુ મળ્યા છે અને સર્વજ્ઞ પ્રણિત ધર્મ મળ્યો છે. આવા વખતે કર્મને ભોગવીને પરિણામ નહીં ટકાવીએ તો જ્યારે શ્રી જિનેશ્વર દેવનું ધર્મનું શ્રવણ વગેરે નહીં હોય ત્યારે પરિણામ શું ટકવાનું? So now that we can suffer silently and we can retain our equanimity, then it is good and better to suffer whatever may be thrown at us, and even if other karmas come to fruition earlier, then it is a good thing. And that is only possible when one has the ability, meaning one is a manushya who has the ability to reason and think properly and also has the background of the right Dev, Guru and Dharma. And when a karma as a result of yoga and adhyavasai doesn't come to fruition, it just stays dormant. યોગ અને અધ્યાવસાયના જે બળને લીધે કર્મો શાંત પડ્યા રહે, એટલે કે તેમાં ઉદય કે ઉદીરણા ન થાય, તેને ઉપશમનાકરણ કહેવાય. અંગારા જેવી રીત ચલી રહ્યા હોય તેના પર રાખ નાખી દઈએ તો તે ઠંડા પડી જાય છે. So the example that is given here, that if you got coal which is hot, and if you pour some ash over that coal, then that coal, the burning coal, loses its heat slowly. And upsamnakaran is like putting out the heat from this burning coal by pouring ash over them. તેના જેવી આ સ્થિતિ છે. આ હાલતમાં કર્મની ઉદ્વર્તના, અપવર્તના તેમજ કર્મનું સંક્રમણ થઈ શકે છે. So if the karma is suppressed, meaning it doesn't come into fruition, then while it is still lying dormant, then the karma can change udvartana and apvartana, meaning it can increase or decrease. So good karmas can increase and bad karmas can be reduced if you maintain a positive attitude. Another thing to understand is that when a karma has begun to start showing its effect, meaning it has already entered its uday avlika kar, meaning somebody's time has changed, a karma has come into uday and it is now beginning to show, it has started to show its effect. At that point, when a karma has actually begun its action of fruition, from that point onward, that karma cannot be modified. So it says here, ઉદય અવલિકમાં પ્રવિષ્ટ થઈ ચૂક્યા હોય જે કર્મો તેને કરણ ન લાગે, બીજા બધાને લાગે. So only those karmas that are lying dormant can be changed. જેમ એક યંત્રના બધા ભાગો સાથે કામ કરે છે, તેમાં બધા કારણો સાથે કામ કરે છે. આત્મા સમયે સમયે કર્મ ગ્રહણ કરે છે, એટલે બંધનકરણ ચાલુ જ હોય છે. તે વખતે ઢીલા કર્મો મજબૂત બનતા હોય છે, મજબૂત વધારે મજબૂત બનતા હોય છે, એટલે નિદતકરણ અને નિકાચનાકરણ પણ ચાલુ જ છે. આ જ વખતે કેટલાક કાર્યોની સ્થિતિ અને રસમાં વધારો ઘટાડો પણ થતો હોય છે, એટલે ઉદ્વર્તના અને અપવર્તનાકરણ પણ ચાલુ છે. તે જ વખતે કર્મની સજાતીય પ્રકૃતિઓ પલટાતી હોય છે, એટલે સંક્રમણકરણ પણ પોતાનું કામ કરતું હોય છે. અને એ વખતે કર્મનો ઉદય કે ઉદીરણા ચાલુ હોય છે અને કેટલાક કર્મો શાંત થતા હોય છે, એટલે ઉદીરણાકરણ અને ઉપશમનાકરણ પણ કાર્યશીલ હોય છે. જ્યાં સુધી આત્મા વિતરાગ ન બને ત્યાં સુધી તેમાં શુભ અશુભ પ્રવૃત્તિ ચાલુ હોય છે. શુભ પ્રવૃત્તિ વધારવી અને અશુભ પ્રવૃત્તિ ઘટાડવી એ આગળ વધવાનો માર્ગ છે. પરંતુ આપણી હાલત બુરી છે. આપણે કમાણીને ખોટ કહીએ છીએ અને ખોટને કમાણી કહીએ છીએ. અને in this pravachan, Maharaj Sahib is making a comment to the group here. ધર્મના કામમાં પૈસા ખર્ચો છો તેમાં ખરેખર તમને કમાણી થાય છે, છતાં તમે કહો છો કે આટલા વપરાઈ ગયા, ઓછા થયા. એ જ રીતે તમને પૈસા મળે તેને કમાણી ગણો છો, પણ પુણ્ય ઉદયમાં આવ્યું એટલે ખર્ચાયું, ત્યારે તમને પૈસા મળ્યા એટલે પુણ્યનો જથ્થો જેટલો ઓછો થયો, તમને ઘાટો પડ્યો. આ સમજણ સુધરી જાય તો આગળ વધવું મુશ્કેલ નથી. સો is making a comment based on spiritual understanding of our situations. And I read this particular chapter on Karan from this particular book that I mentioned before. It's Atma Tattva Vichar, and the subject of karma is succinctly covered in this particular book. So we'll end this particular topic today and talk about Nirjara next week. There are two questions here. That is from Sandeep. Okay. Anybody else has got any other questions? Sandeep, we've already answered yours. Bharatbhai, any comments?
No, Ajitbhai. Thank you.
Asubhai?
Yes. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear?
Yeah. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Go on, Asubhai. Asubhai?
Hello? Can you hear me, Ajitbhai?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Ajitbhai, first of all, thank you and the rest of the teachers and organizers, IT, etc. I only attended the Thursday beginners classes to find out the meaning of Nauka mantra.
Mm-hmm.
But before I ask my question, I have a scenario. So,
Mhm.
because of my very good karmas, I was born into a Jain household.
Mhm.
So I set off on this sea of sansar on my beautiful yacht with my baggage of karma.
Mhm.
In my first years, I traveled along, hitting a few pebbles and sand, etc., and I got some minute cracks.
Mhm.
As I grew up to be a teenager, I hit a few larger rocks and boulders,
Mhm.
and several holes developed in the yacht, which is Ashraf, right?
Mhm.
Ever since, I've been in a feedback loop, i.e., accumulating more and more karmas.
Mhm.
And at the present time, I've realized that my yacht is almost full,
Mhm.
and I have started the practice of penance, meditation, etc.
Mhm.
However, before I have even started the process of samvar, my
Mhm.
Ayusha karma comes along and
Mhm.
says, son, it's
Mhm.
time to leave.
Mhm.
And after several thousand lives, I
Mhm.
end up in the third level of narak
Mhm.
to my nikachik karma, right?
Mhm.
Now, my question is, if I started the process of the dharma, penance, etc.,
Mhm.
will my soul remember this? Uh, and the analogy is, if I end up in prison for something wrong,
Mhm.
prison is meant to be rehabilitating, right?
Mhm.
But most prisoners end up committing more crimes, etc.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, in my lifetime now, I haven't remembered my past lives, etc.
Mhm.
So, will I still remember that I've started this process and can I move forward?
You see, in the example that you've given, there are lots of souls in Narak, And by virtue of the birth in Narak and Devlok, one has Audignan. So one remembers the past life. If, however, at that point, you may remember what you have learned in the life in Narak, because by virtue of being born there, you have the necessary Gnan. But the progress of the soul depends on the level of purity of the soul. And to understand this better, a lot of the knowledge that we gain, if it remains at the level of an understanding and a clarity in terms of the words and logic, and it doesn't enter deeper into the level of experience, meaning the experience of, say, purity at the level of the soul, then progress can be difficult. So ultimately, the aim in this life is to try and get to the level of, to begin with, we have to understand, and to understand it, if we listen to our Adhyatmic teachings from our great Guru Bhagwans, then a lot of them at an advanced stage will keep on emphasizing the idea that when you begin the process of learning and understanding, you want to try and extend that further into an experience of actually being what you are meant to be. And when it reaches that level, then your spiritual progress becomes much, much faster. So in terms of acquiring knowledge, so for example, there are people who may have acquired the knowledge of up to several purvas. In a future life, it is not impossible that those souls may be born into a Tiryanch life, one sensed, two sensed, five sensed. So, for example, if you look at the life of Bhagwan Mahavir in his life as Marichi, he had actually advanced quite a lot. But his subsequent journeys, as a result of a major fault that he committed during that life, led to a downward trend to a level. So this is a point that I mentioned in one of the classes before. If you look at all the 27 lives of Bhagwan Mahavir, these are the major lives that are being described. In between, there are periods, very long periods, when Bhagwan Mahavir's soul, the lives are not described in detail, because those were all subhuman lives. So, I mean, the major lives are described: Manushya, Devlok, Narak, Sea. Those lives are described, but there are two periods when there are lots of other small lives, when the soul would have had no capacity to understand, and it's to an extent lost. But to answer your question, all the effort that is made in understanding and in experiencing what the true nature of the soul is will slowly build up a level of our progress, which at some stage will come to fruition. So when you talk about the question of remembering and memory, so for example, there are examples of Tiryanch Panchendriya, meaning animal life, five sensed animal life, who have remembered their previous lives, and as a result of that recollection of their previous lives, they have changed their behavior in that particular life. So there are several examples of animals who in that particular life have changed direction. And one good example from Bhagwan Mahavir's life is what happened to Chand Kaushik as a result of his contact with Bhagwan Mahavir, and Bhagwan Mahavir's very uh, kind and benevolent words of booze, booze, Chand Kaushik triggered a sense of remembering his Jati Smaragnan of what had happened in his previous lives, and his life from that point onwards progressed. And there are similar examples in other stories that we've talked about. So the point I'm trying to make is that remembering knowledge is one level, getting it deeper into a level of experience and understanding the true nature of the soul is the level that we really need to try and aspire towards. And that requires a lot of personal, regular education, but also practice. And by practice, I mean internal practice. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. If not, we will start off with the topic on Nirjara and then Moksha. And we may be on this topic of Nav Tatva for the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Pranam.
Ah.
So all these 8 aje current this happen automatically, like naturally, not in our conscious, like we are not aware of it, right?
We are not aware of them. Yeah.
Okay. So
And
this
that's
is
happening all the time. And it's happening simultaneously. So at every moment we are acquiring karmas.
okay.
But based on what is the state of our mind, of our state of our soul, all these karmas are happening.
Okay.
So in our negative state, some karmas are being made worse,
Yeah.
and in our better states, they are made better.
Okay. So it's continuous ongoing process with each and every karma. Same.
Well, those karmas that can be modified, that processes may change. So as new karmas are being acquired, other karmas are being modified.
Okay. તો ઉદીરણાને ઈ પણ આપણાથી ના થાય ને, like not possible ne, like because we are not
Well,
aware of it.
we were not aware, but all positive activity can bring them on, bring on udirana. But we wouldn't know, and only a Gnani Bhagwan would say, okay, in this particular frame of mind, and then for that duration, when you did this and you did that, it was a good thing that you actually brought into fruition this many karmas that if they had not been modified or changed or got rid of, then they would have given you a very bad experience in 10 lives from now, or something like that. But only a Gnani would know. We wouldn't. Yeah. But we will talk about what happens to karma when we get rid of them next week. So Nirjara, and that is all about tap, and 2 different types of tap, baya and abhyantar. And there is a lot to understand there. And one of the abhyantar tap that we talk about is swadhyay. That is what we are doing when the soul gets engaged in swa adhyay. Swa adhyay means that
activity.
Atmano adhyay karvo, meaning to begin to understand who we are.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you all very much for listening. Jinagna Virudh Kaimparam Bulyo ho, te savi hum manochan kaya kari, tasmichhami dugudam. If I have said anything against, which is different from the teachings of our great Tirthankar Paramatma's Guru Bhagwans and Dharma. I ask for forgiveness. I apologize. Sarvamangalamangalyam Sarkalyan Karanam Pradhanam Sarvadharmanam Jainam Jaiti Sasanam. Thank you, Mira, Kavit, and Darshana.
Thank you, Ajitbhai.
Thank you.
Pranam Ajitbhai, thank you.
Pranam. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Ajitbhai.
Pranam. Thank you.
Pranam.
I
Thank
hope everybody doing ambel is in Sukshata.
Badhane Satare.
Yeah.
Satama. Thank you.
Ambil ni berdana satare.